Hey everyone, it's Allie, and today I want to talk about the major upgrades for our stat stacking Pillar the Cage God Gemling Legionnaire. Today we're going to go over a way for you to become substantially tankier if you are playing this on a just got to hand of wisdom action budget, as well as today's video is going to start our discussion of what the mid game of this build is going to look like, and we're going to start discussing some higher end items for you to purchase once you have hand of wisdom in action and once you have some half decent gear in all of your slots. Before we get any further, I do want to mention that the written guide has been fully finished now, and all the information that you might need to play this build, along with everything that we're going to discuss today, will all be found in here. I'd highly recommend to go look through it, and it'll be linked in the description below, as I put my heart and soul into this, so I'd highly recommend for you to try and read through this to see if it answers any of your questions. When I say there's a lot of info in here, I literally mean there's a lot of info in here. Look how much I've scrolled through trying to just tell you all this. I do also want to mention something really quickly at the start of this video because a lot of people have been asking me about it. I, for the past few days, have been playing a Chaos Inoculation setup because I wanted to test a little bit of tech to see if we can fit into our build in a mid-game budget that would hopefully make us unbelievably tanky. I ended up trying it out and it basically accomplished nothing. It was just as good as you playing the build on a life-based build, but instead of me selling the items that were required to swap over to it, I did end up just deciding to stick with it just because I'm too lazy. And I kind of like saying I have a 30 div paperweight in my build. But for everyone who's curious about it, there will be an update on how to swap over to Chaos Inoculation in a few days. But I want to talk about everything that we're talking about in this video, along with some other important concepts before we even attempt to discuss Chaos Inoculation, as it's basically one of the last things that you'd actually want to do in this build due to how gear dependent it actually is. So with that out of the way, let's talk about today's updates. Previously, we were running a life on kill and a mana on kill jewel in the build. And what we want to do now is then combine that with running a bunch of jewels that have the % of damage taken from mana before life mod on them. These are going to do exactly the same thing that Mental Perseverance and Lucidity have been doing, where they're going to convert a portion of the damage you take over to mana. We aren't really doing anything with our mana pool, especially now that we've swapped over to the low-level Tempest Flurry plus Charge Staff technology, meaning we're free to get a bunch of the stat to mitigate as much damage as possible by just moving it over. In the description below, there will be a trade link to get yourself some of these jewels, but I will say that this trade link is a little bit aggressive. As you can see, all the options are 3 div plus. So what I'd recommend for you to do is to maybe change the count to something like a 1, or maybe change the % from 4 to something like 3, and you'll find yourself some substantially cheaper options. These are going to be a little bit expensive, but we are out of the early game where we are done with all the cheap upgrades. And now all of our future upgrades, as we keep pushing further into a build, are going to start costing close to a div, and if not over a div, as we keep going further and further. These are really good, and I'd recommend for you to get yourself maybe 4 or 5 of them, as we do have quite a lot of jewel sockets, and that by itself should put you close to about 50% of damage taken from mana before life, meaning if you have about 2,000 mana pool, which should be about the average, and you have about 3,000 or so life, you can effectively say you now have about 5,000 total life, because for the first 2,000 of your 3,000 life, half of the damage will effectively be mitigated by your mana pool that isn't doing anything, and then the last 1,000 will not be protected by anything, because at that point your mana pool will be gone. You might want to get yourself another % mana on kill jewel to accompany this if it doesn't feel very comfy, and that's up to you, but personally I've been playing a full mind over matter setup where I am still running a 1% mana on kill jewel and nothing else, and I'm having 0 mana problems at all, but I can see how it might feel a little bit bad on bossing, as some bosses do hit kind of hard. Moving on from there, your next real big upgrade in the build, once you have yourself a good pair of rings, a good belt, and a good pair of boots, is to go and look for an Against the Darkness. This is a special jewel that will give you a radius around wherever you put it, and it's going to do certain things to either the small nodes or the big nodes within the circle. What we want to look for on this Against the Darkness is specifically one that gives every big node within the radius % increased intelligence. This roll is going to go from 2 to 4%. So it's going to be up to you if you want to look for a high one or if you look for a low one. But if you specifically take this jewel and put it in this socket, it's going to hit Blinding Flash, Sand in the Eyes, Jack of all trades, and polymathy. And in my case, with a 3% roll, I'm getting myself 12% increased intelligence, which is quite a lot. I end up finding myself one with +1 maximum fire res, so I'm also getting +4 maximum fire res from all these nodes, and it's going to be up to you if you want to look for a second stat on it. Now, unfortunately, looking for this jewel is probably one of the worst experiences you will ever have in this game. The issue with Against the Darkness, and a lot of the unique jewels that we're going to be talking about today, is that you cannot search their modifiers on the trade website. None of these are searchable. So the only thing you could really do to look for these, and for a lot of the jewels we're going to talk about today, is for you to search the jewel and then scroll down to load as many of them as you possibly can. And then once you have all these loaded, you're then going to hit Ctrl F to bring up the search on your browser and then just type in int. This is going to show you if there's anything that hits on this page, and you're simply just going to want to look through all of them. In this case, there seems to have been one for a div, and that is unironically the only way for you to be able to look for these. If there's none, unfortunately, we can't load more for one div, so we'd have to just go to the buyout price, change it to a minimum of 2 div, and then search again by doing the same thing where we just scroll down to load a bunch of these. And then once we do, we can just type int into our search bar again and see if there's any available. This jewel is worth somewhere around 4 to 5 div in most cases, but you might be able to find yourself, for example, like this, a random one that's priced a little bit low just because, well, this is the only way to find these, which makes it a little bit hard for people to actually find them, meaning you might find yourself one for a little bit cheaper. It's really annoying, but this jewel gives you so much intelligence that it's highly worth it to do this. And it's, again, up to you if you want to look for a jewel with a second good modifier on it. Ideally, a best in slot one of these would be one with %int and %dexterity on them, but those are going to be unbelievably expensive. From there, the next jewel that you're going to want to consider is going to be grand spectrums. These are jewels that multiply off of each other, giving you, in our case with the sapphire ones, 3% resistance per grand spectrum that you have equipped, up to a limit of 3. If you have 3 of these, that means we're getting 27% total elemental resistances, which not only is it going to make getting your resistance cap a lot easier, but which we'll unfortunately have to talk about in the next video as this topic is way too large for its own video. When you swap over to Ingenuity, which would be something you'd want to do around this point in your build, you're going to have an issue with resistances, and these grand spectrums are going to be the best way for you to fix them. There's going to be a budget way for you to fit Ingenuity into your build, which again, we'll talk about in tomorrow's update. I'm sorry, it would literally just take way too long to mention here. But to be able to upgrade from the budget Ingenuity setup to a proper Ingenuity setup, you would need to eventually get yourself 3 grand spectrums. Up next, we have Prism of Belief. This is a pretty simple jewel that just increases the level of your skills. You have a few choices on what to find here. And for a single target, I'd recommend Tempest Spell. For AoE, I'd recommend Herald of Ice. Or if you want to mix of both, I'd recommend Charged Staff. Extra gem levels is one of the best way to scale a skill. So simply just choose if you want to increase your single target, AoE, or a little bit of both, and find yourself a Prism of Belief of that type. Now, if you thought that finding this was simple, well, same issue as Against the Darkness. You cannot search these. So your best bet is to simply scroll and load as many as you can, and then simply go to the top. For example, if you want to find a charge staff one, so just type charge staff and see if you can find yourself one. Really annoying, and I'm sorry, there's no better way of doing this because the trade website currently sucks. Moving on from there, we have ourselves a From Nothing. Now, I would recommend to most likely consider getting this jewel pretty late into your build, as there's only a very specific one that we need. It's going to be unbelievably expensive. From Nothing is going to be a jewel that's going to make a radius around a given keystone, and you're going to be allowed to pick up any passive point around that keystone without you having to path to it. In our case, we're going to want to find one for resonance. This is going to give us a big circle around it, which specifically hits spaghettification, which is 7% increased attributes. This node is crazy powerful, and unfortunately, this also makes it very expensive. Spaghettification from Nothings typically range around 20 to 30 div or so it would be more of a later upgrade for you to get, but the insane amount of extra attributes you get from 7% attributes is very hard to pass out on as you push further and further into build. And unfortunately, because again, you can't search for this, you have to do the Ctrl F tech, meaning it's kind of a pain in the ass to try and find one. But one potential cute option for you to consider would be to get yourself an Iron Reflexes one, which would then allow you to pick up Bleeding Out and General's Bindings, not because they're good nodes, but because they're inside of your Against the Darkness radius, meaning for 2 passive points, you could get yourself, in my case, 6% additional intelligence. It would be worth including, and you'd have to figure out where to get 2 passive points to make this work. But that is another option. But outside of that, there literally is nothing else worth considering. Finally, the last jewel that we would want to talk about in terms of unique jewels is going to be Controlled Metamorphosis. Now, this one is a really fun one, but I don't think you're going to be able to fit this into your build until you get yourself Grand Spectrums. This will reduce your Chaos Res and your elemental resistances, but it will give you a ring of a specific radius around it that will allow you to pick up any passive points that you want to within that ring. In our case, we'd want to put one at the top of the passive tree, which will end up hitting Pure Power, Drenched, and Lightning Quick with a massive radius ring. For 3 passive points, these points are really good and they're highly worth it. But again, you're most likely going to want to wait until the Grand Spectrums to get this, as the resistances from this are pretty difficult to deal with. Luckily for the Controlled Metamorphosis, we can actually search for it on the trade website, and we can specifically look for nothing but massive ones by simply getting this filter and setting it to a minimum of 8. So every single one of these will be massive, meaning all you have to do is simply just find one that doesn't have a very low amount of resistance on it. Now, you cannot divine these, as if you do that, it will divine the radius of the ring. So do be warned if you do attempt to buy one of these and just say, oh, but I just divine this to a much better roll. No, you cannot, and you would basically just end the jewel completely. All these jewels are fairly expensive, but they're all fairly powerful, and add a pretty massive amount of additional power to our build, especially against the darkness, as you can pretty easily get yourself anywhere between 8 to 16% increased intelligence fairly easily for just 4 to 5 div, which is an insane amount of extra damage. And then the grand spectrums, while pricey, would make our build feel a lot comfier and allow us to add a bunch of other really fun things such as controlled metamorphosis. I would honestly recommend purchasing everything in the order that I talked about them in this video. I tried to mention them in chronological order that you'd most likely want to go and buy them in, but you're obviously free to use your own discretion and buy them in any order that you think is going to be worth it in your case. If you have any questions on this, feel free to leave a comment in the comments below. I'd be more than happy to help you as soon as I can. I also stream on Twitch every single day, so feel free to come by Twitch and ask me your questions there. And I can't wait to see you guys in tomorrow's update, where we're going to talk about Ingenuity and how to fit that into the build, as that by itself will be a massive upgrade for the build, and it should allow us to do some very silly things. With all that said, cuties, I hope you enjoy the rest of the day, and I'll see you all in the next video.